Rain lashed across the open prairie like a whip. The wind howled, carving ghosts in the fog that clung low to the sodden earth. A lone rider pressed forward, drenched to the bone, hat pulled low, his face shadowed but set like granite. His name was Elias Cole. The mule beneath him groaned with each step, hooves sinking into mud. Elias barely noticed. His fingers clutched the reins with the grip of a dying man holding on to what little remained. Behind him, nothing but a trail of sorrow. Ahead, unknown land, indifferent sky, and the weight of something he couldn't name clawing at his chest. He hadn't spoken in days. There was no one to speak to. The silence suited him, better than the sound of a baby coughing its last breath or the fevered mutterings of a woman delirious with sickness. Better than the memory of dirt hitting the wooden box that held both. He'd buried them at dawn 3 weeks ago, his wife Clara and their son, not yet a year old. A simple wooden cross marked the grave near their cabin outside Helena. After the sickness took them, the bank came next. Crops failed, cattle stolen. The land, once green and full of hope, turned cold and hostile. So he left. Now, the land around him swelled with thorn brush and bitter wind. The Civil War had ended years ago, but it left behind hungry mouths and angry men. The West promised new beginnings, but Elias had already tasted what the land offered: hard truths and shallow graves. The storm began to ease as the outline of a rough settlement emerged from the haze, a crooked line of buildings squatting against the hills. Fort Jameson. Elias squinted. 2 saloons, a blacksmith, a church with a steeple cracked by lightning, and a gathering of horses outside a corral. The place stank of desperation. He fit right in. He dismounted, bones aching, and led the mule toward the hitching post. Inside the saloon, sour whiskey and worse breath filled the air. Card tables scraped the floor. Men muttered over hands of poker, eyes shifting like snakes. "Drink," the barkeep asked, not looking up. "Work," Elias replied. The man grunted, nodded toward a table near the back. "You might ask Thompson. Runs the southern ranches, pays if he likes your face." Elias turned and stopped. At that table sat a man built like an ox in his winter coat, eyes bloodshot, lips stained with chewing tobacco. But Elias wasn't staring at him. He was staring at the woman beside him. She stood rigid, hands bound by leather cord at her wrists. A bruise colored her cheekbone. Her dress was worn at the seams, dirt crusted along the hem. But her eyes, they were clear, piercing, and locked on Elias the moment he stepped forward. Not pleading, not afraid, just hollow. Thompson leaned back in his chair. "She ain't yours to gawk at, friend." "I didn't come here for women," Elias replied. "Well then," Thompson grinned, "you picked a bad time. She's mine now. Bought her off her drunkard uncle. Sealed deal. Getting hitched come morning." Elias felt the air shift. This wasn't just cruelty, it was a transaction. Legal, maybe in places like this. Moral? That word had been buried along with civilization out here. The woman looked down. Thompson's hand fell to her waist. She flinched. "What's her name?" Elias asked quietly. Thompson blinked. "Don't matter none to you. I'm making it matter." The table quieted. Cards froze mid-shuffle. The air in the saloon thickened. Elias stepped forward, the hem of his coat dripping onto the dusty floorboards. "You said you bought her. A deal's a deal, right? Maybe I want to make one of my own." Thompson stood. A hush rippled through the room. "You got coin?" "No." "Then you got nothing." "I've got name, and I'm offering marriage. Today." A few patrons snorted. One chuckled nervously. "Marriage?" Thompson sneered. "To her." "To her." "What?" Elias stared at the woman. She didn't flinch this time. She met his gaze and held it. And in that brief silence, something passed between them, recognition. She had known loss. She had tasted the same bitter wind. "Because I've lost everything that ever mattered," Elias said. "I got nothing to sell, nothing to steal. But I won't watch a man take another soul like he owns her." The barkeep cleared his throat. "Well, preacher's still alive, far as I know. He'll marry anything for a silver dollar and a swig." Thompson growled. "She's mine." Elias stepped closer. "Then claim her like a man, or let her go and be done." A silence fell like thunder. Thompson's hand went to the knife at his belt, but froze. Elias didn't move. His eyes held the kind of fire that only grief could forge. Then, with a scoff, Thompson shoved the woman forward. You want her? Fine. Take the baggage. She stumbled, caught herself. For the first time, her lips moved. Anna-Louise. Elias nodded once. Elias Cole. An hour later, the saloon preacher, half drunk, half asleep, read his vows over a chipped Bible. Elias and Anna-Louise stood side by side, strangers by every measure but one. Each had nothing left but the breath in their lungs. No rings? The preacher asked. No need, Elias said. They left the saloon as the sun dipped low, cutting red light through the storm clouds. Behind them, Thompson glared, chewing hard, fingers twitching near his holster. They rode out of Fort Jameson before nightfall, her seated behind him on the mule. She said nothing. He didn't press. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of all the things they didn't have to explain. Behind them, the wind whispered across the open plains, carrying the scent of blood, dust, and something darker, something that would not stay buried for long. Ahead, the wilderness waited, and though they didn't know it yet, so did war. The trail wound away from Fort Jameson in a serpentine line of hoof prints, vanishing into the hills like a scar across the land. Elias and Anna-Louise rode in silence, the rhythm of the mule steady beneath them. Her arms, unsure at first, eventually wrapped around his waist. Not in intimacy, but survival. The cold was biting. Distant thunder grumbled, though the skies had cleared. Neither of them spoke. There was no room for small talk between strangers tied by desperation. By dusk, they made camp beneath a cluster of twisted pines. The fire Elias built sputtered reluctantly, damp wood hissing as it caught. He gave her the blanket. She accepted without thanks. He didn't expect one. She sat on a rock, staring into the flames, eyes vacant. Her dress clung to her frame, still damp from rain, the hem torn. Elias handed her a tin of beans. She took it with trembling fingers, but didn't eat. You hungry or just stubborn? He asked, voice low. Anna-Louise looked up slowly. Stomach's not sure it wants to keep anything in. Eat anyway. She did a few slow bites. You didn't have to do what you did, she said after a pause. I did. Why? Elias considered lying, saying something about chivalry or pity, but she'd smelled dishonesty. He could see it in her. She was too familiar with men who lied. I looked at you, he said, and saw what I see every morning in the mirror. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. You don't know what I've been through. No, he admitted, but I can guess. The silence returned, but this time it had weight. Not absence, but presence. They both stared at the fire like it might answer questions neither dared ask. By morning, the sun broke through a haze of fog. Elias scouted ahead, watching for riders. He didn't trust Thompson. A man like that didn't take losing lightly. Sure enough, hoofprints followed theirs. He didn't wake Anna right away. Let her sleep a little longer, curled in the blanket, arms folded tight. But his gut twisted. Time was running out. They needed to move, and fast. When she woke, she noticed the shift in him. What is it? She asked, brushing hair from her eyes. We're being followed. She didn't panic, just nodded, as if she expected nothing less. They packed quickly, barely speaking. Elias led them off the main trail toward the highlands, where the land grew rougher, steeper. He knew the terrain would slow any pursuers, but it'd slow them too. That night, as dusk bled across the sky in bruised purples and golds, Elias placed a revolver beside Anna on the bedroll. She looked at it like it was a snake. I don't need that. You do. I've never shot one. You will. She picked it up, held it wrong. He corrected her grip with gentle hands. Her skin flinched under his touch, but she didn't pull away. Point. He said, breathe, squeeze. Don't yank. She aimed at a knot in a nearby tree. The shot rang out, louder than expected, echoing through the gulch. Birds scattered into the dusk. The knot exploded into splinters. Elias blinked. First time, huh? She shrugged. First time someone handed me one without expecting me to shoot myself. He almost smiled. Almost. But when the fire died down and shadows swallowed the trees, A deeper unease settled over them. The hoofprints earlier weren't distant. The riders were gaining. And soon they'd have to decide, flee or fight. "Do you think I'm yours now?" she asked suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. Elias looked at her through the firelight. "No, I think we're both borrowed from the grave and trying to stay that way." She nodded slowly. "I was married once before." He waited. "Caleb. He died in the Silverroot mine collapse. They brought him up in pieces." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He drank most nights and left bruises when he wasn't in the bottle." Silence stretched. "My uncle gambled me away." Thompson didn't even hesitate. Just tossed a sack of coins on the table. Said he'd break me in like a filly. Her jaw clenched. Firelight flickered across the bruise on her cheek. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, but Elias saw it. The slow thawing of something inside her, like a locked door, cracked open just enough to glimpse the dark behind it. He spoke gently. "What do you want, Anna-Louise?" She blinked. "What? If it were up to you. If there weren't men following us with rifles. If the world wasn't made of rot. What would you want?" She looked away, as if ashamed to say. "Peace," she murmured. He nodded. "I don't know what that looks like," she added. "Maybe we find it together." She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on his a second longer than before. Later that night, as Elias kept watch beneath the stars, he heard it, the distant snore of horses. Maybe 2 miles out. They'd be on them by morning. He shook her awake. "Time to go. No fire. Not tonight." They rode beneath a moonless sky, stars splattered above like frost on black glass. The mule moved steadily, but Elias kept checking their back trail. It wouldn't be long now. Before dawn, they reached a narrow canyon Elias had remembered from cattle drives years ago. It was a choke point, good for ambush, bad for escape. "We'll rest here a moment," he said. Anna-Louise slid off the mule, rubbing her knees. "Is this wise?" "No, but we're out of choices." She scanned the ridgelines. "They'll come through here. They have to." She reached into her satchel, pulled out the revolver. Her hands no longer shook. "If they come," she said, "we don't run." "No," Elias agreed, tightening his grip on his rifle. "We don't." As the sky brightened to a cold, pale blue, wind stirred the dust at their feet. The earth was quiet, holding its breath. From a distant ridge, a flicker of movement. Then another. Anna-Louise raised the pistol without hesitation. Elias smiled grimly. "They're coming." And for the first time in days, she smiled back. "Let them." The canyon walls rose steeply, narrowing as the earth twisted upward in jagged rocks. The only sounds were the wind, the occasional shift of the mule, and the soft rustle of Anna-Louise's breath. Elias could feel the weight of the silence, an oppressive stillness that stretched across the canyon like a veil. Every crack and crevice held something waiting to spring, something hungry. They weren't alone. He motioned for her to stay low, crouching behind a boulder that jutted from the canyon floor like a sentinel. His eyes scanned the horizon, narrowing at the distant ridge where he had seen the flickers. The morning light crept slowly over the peaks, casting long shadows. In that moment, the land seemed to hold its breath, as if it too knew what was coming. Anna-Louise crouched beside him, her revolver held steady in her hands. Her face, usually composed, was tight with tension. Elias could see the fear behind her eyes, but there was something else too, something steely that hadn't been there when they first met. She was no longer the woman he had rescued from Thompson. She was becoming something else, something sharper, something that could survive this. Elias turned his attention back to the ridge. There, movement. It was subtle, like the flicker of a shadow against the rocky outcrop, but it was there. 2 riders, then 3. They were spread out across the high ground, trying to flank. The rest would be right behind them. "They're coming," he whispered. Anna-Louise didn't flinch. Her eyes were locked onto his, steady. "I know," she replied, her voice colder than the morning air. "Let's wait." He didn't argue. There was no point in running now. The canyon was too narrow, too exposed. They'd be trapped if they tried to flee. This was their only chance, and it was a slim one. The riders would likely try to flush them out, force them into the open. But Elias had a plan, and Anna-Louise was smart enough to trust it. He reached into his coat, and pulled out a small, hand-carved whistle. It was a signal, a tool of an old trade he hadn't used in years. It was a sound that carried for miles, sharp and clear, cutting through the quiet. He raised it to his lips and blew. The sound echoed through the canyon, unnatural and piercing. It was a signal, a warning, a call to someone who wasn't supposed to be here but had been watching from the shadows. Anna-Louise's eyes darted toward him, understanding settling in her chest like a rock. "You got a friend?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. His friend knew exactly where they were, knew exactly what to do. Moments passed like hours. The wind shifted, and with it came the scent of rain, heavy and thick. The sky, once clear, now began to darken, as if the heavens themselves had decided to join the hunt. The first crack of thunder rolled across the hills, low and distant, but full of promise. It wasn't just the riders that were coming. The storm was too. The riders moved closer, their horses' hooves barely making a sound on the dirt. Elias gripped his rifle tighter. Anna-Louise had her revolver ready, her knuckles white against the grip. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. The air hummed with anticipation, the kind of silence that comes before a storm or a fight. And then it happened. The first rider broke from the ridge, barreling down the slope, eyes locked on their position. His horse was a dark, muscular beast, its breath steaming in the cool air. He was fast, too fast for them to outrun. The other riders followed in a tight formation, splitting the canyon into two. Elias took a deep breath, settled his stance, and aimed. The first rider was within range. He pulled the trigger, the sharp crack of the rifle splitting the air. The rider jerked back in the saddle, a spray of red mist blooming from his chest. The horse reared, panicked, throwing its rider to the ground with a sickening thud. Anna-Louise didn't hesitate. She raised the revolver, aimed at the second rider, and fired. The shot rang out, and the man slumped forward, his horse losing its footing as it collapsed to the ground. The rider was thrown, rolling across the canyon floor like a rag doll. Elias didn't have time to celebrate the hits. The remaining riders were already upon them. They were close now, too close. He could hear their shouts, their hooves pounding the earth like thunder. The storm was upon them, too. The rain began to fall in sheets, cold and relentless. "Get to cover," Elias shouted, shoving Anna-Louise behind a boulder as the remaining riders approached. She didn't argue. She dove into the shelter of the rock, pressing herself flat against it, heart racing. Elias followed, ducking low as he heard the clatter of hooves and the cries of men eager for blood. The riders slowed as they approached, wary now. They had seen their comrades fall, but they were still men driven by pride and rage. They were here to finish what Thompson had started, to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Elias waited, watching the rain mix with the blood on the ground. His pulse thudded in his ears, and for a moment, everything seemed to stand still, time stretching out like a wire about to snap. The riders spread out, searching for a way in, knowing they had the advantage of numbers. But Elias was patient. He knew this terrain. He had walked it before, and in the time it took for one of the riders to move just a few steps too far, Elias was already there, rifle aimed. The shot was quick, brutal. Another rider fell, and chaos erupted. Hooves and men scrambled, panic setting in. The remaining riders were no longer soldiers. They were animals, desperate to survive. The canyon had become their prison. But before Elias could take another shot, the ground beneath them shook with a deep rumble. A roar of wind tore through the canyon, and the storm, no longer a distant threat, hit them in full force. The rain lashed out like knives, and the air filled with the crackling of lightning. It was as if the earth itself had joined the fray. The riders reeled, their horses bucking against the gale. But Elias had no intention of letting the storm decide their fate. He moved faster than he had in years, his muscles aching but driven by something deeper than fear. Anna-Louise was right behind him, gun raised, eyes wild with the same determination. They were not running. The storm raged as they fought, lightning illuminating the canyon like the hand of God. With each shot, with each movement, Elias felt himself slip further away from the man he had once been. He was becoming something else, a hunter, a survivor. The land had tested him, but now, for the first time in a long while, he felt alive. And in the storm, they fought, not just for their lives, but for the future they might build together. The riders were falling, one by one, but they were not the only danger. As Elias fired again, a shadow loomed at the edge of the canyon. The storm was not the only predator. The true hunt was just beginning. The storm raged, a cacophony of wind and rain crashing against the earth. Elias could hardly hear himself think as the lightning split the sky into jagged veins of light. The canyon was alive with the sound of rushing water, thunder, and the pounding of hooves that seemed to shake the ground beneath him. The battle was no longer just with the riders. It was with nature itself, a force too immense to fight directly. But they had no choice. They fought because there was no other option. The last of the riders was down. Elias could see the bodies littered across the canyon floor, their horses gone wild, galloping into the storm like they were fleeing from something even worse than death. His rifle, once warm in his hands, now felt like an extension of his body, cold, heavy, and useless. But Anna-Louise hadn't moved. Elias turned to her, his heart in his throat. The rain was coming in sheets, but through it, he saw her standing by the edge of the canyon, staring at something. Her gun was still in her hands, but her body was frozen. There was something in the distance, something moving. "Anna!" he shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the wind. She didn't hear him. Her eyes were locked on the shifting figure, a shadow against the dimming light of the storm. Elias stepped forward, heart hammering in his chest. He could feel it in his gut, the same gnawing sensation he had when he had first sensed the riders coming. There was danger in the air, something beyond what they had just faced. Without another thought, he lunged toward her, pulling her roughly out of the way, just as a shot rang out from across the canyon. A bullet tore through the air where they had been standing just moments before. Elias didn't think. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her down behind the nearest boulder. "Stay low," he growled, his voice hoarse from the rain and adrenaline. She nodded, but her face was pale, her lips trembling. She was shaken, but not by the violence of the fight. No, there was something else in her eyes. A realization. "They're not dead," she whispered, eyes wide. "There's more of them." Elias cursed under his breath. He had thought it was over. The last of Thompson's men should have been dealt with, but the storm had hidden the true threat. The riders, it seemed, were just the beginning. A shadow moved in the distance again, and this time, Elias could see it more clearly. Two figures were emerging from the trees, a man and a woman. They weren't on horseback, but the way they moved through the storm told Elias they were no ordinary travelers. "Who are they?" Anna-Louise asked, her voice barely audible against the howling wind. "I don't know." Elias's voice was grim. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Who could still be coming after them? What did these new figures want? There was a sudden crack of thunder, and in that instant, the two figures were upon them. Fast, too fast. They were no longer silhouettes against the rain, but solid, menacing forms. The woman in the front moved like a snake, fluid and quick, her face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The man behind her was tall, lean, and armed to the teeth with knives, pistols, and a rifle that looked like it had seen 100 years of service. The woman's eyes, however, were what grabbed Elias's attention. They were cold, calculating. She had seen what they had done to the others, and she wasn't scared. Elias stood, rifle ready, but the woman raised her hand, and he froze. Her voice, when it came, was soft but carrying, like the calm before a storm. "Don't do that," she said. "You're not in charge here." The man beside her grinned, but there was no humor in it. His smile was sharp, predatory. "Put the gun down," he said, voice like gravel scraping against stone. Elias didn't lower his rifle, but he didn't raise it either. He was calculating. They couldn't afford another fight. Not yet. The storm was a barrier, blurring their vision, making every movement more dangerous. "You've got nowhere to go," Elias said, trying to steady his breath. "There's no one left to back you up." The woman's lips twisted into a smile. "You think so?" Her eyes flickered to the canyon walls, to the shadows where the storm seemed to grow thicker, darker. And then, as if summoned by her command, More figures emerged from the dark, silent, fluid, and many. There were at least 5 of them now, closing in on all sides. Anna-Louise reached for her revolver, but Elias stopped her with a firm hand on her wrist. "Not yet," he whispered. The woman laughed, low and dangerous. "You don't know what you've gotten yourselves into." Elias kept his eyes on her, watching for any sign of weakness. He had learned in his years of survival that people like this didn't show fear. They used it, they fed on it, and they played games with their prey. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension crawling under his skin. She tilted her head, considering him like a fox eyeing a trap. "I want what was promised to me." Elias narrowed his eyes, but it was Anna-Louise who spoke first, her voice cutting through the charged air. "You work for Thompson?" she demanded. The woman's smile faltered. For a moment, Elias could see the flicker of something. Resentment, maybe, but it was gone in the next breath. "No," the woman said softly, her eyes shifting to Anna-Louise. But he thought he could buy what didn't belong to him. Elias didn't wait for her to finish. Without warning, he raised his rifle and fired. The shot rang out, and in the instant it took for the sound to reach the canyon walls, the woman was already moving, ducking behind a rock. A wild, frantic gunfight erupted. Bullets tore through the air, and the rain intensified, mixing with the screams and the crack of gunfire. The canyon walls echoed with the violence. But amidst it all, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this was something more than just a fight for survival. This was a fight for something deeper, a reckoning, maybe, or an end that neither of them was ready to face. Anna-Louise fired again, her aim true, but there was something different in her now. No longer the terrified woman she had been. She was fierce, determined. Her eyes were locked on the enemy, and there was no hesitation in her shot. They were outnumbered, but Elias wasn't afraid. There was no fear left in him, only fire. And in the end, it would either burn them or burn the world around them. The storm raged on, but Elias knew one thing for sure. This would be the final test. The canyon had never felt so alive, and they would either leave it alive or be swallowed whole by the ash and fire.